There is one conversation in the Gospel record that theologians have wrestled with for 2,000 years. It appears in Matthew chapter 15 and Mark chapter 7. It is the only moment in all 4 canonical Gospels where Jesus refuses someone's request, not once, but 3 times. And then a woman argues back and wins. New Testament scholar Joanna Dewey called it the only instance in the entire Gospel tradition where Jesus is bested by someone in an argument, and that someone was not a Pharisee, not a scribe, not a trained Torah scholar from Jerusalem. It was a Gentile woman from a people group that the Jewish scriptures had commanded Israel to destroy. She had no religious standing, no racial claim, no legal right to address a Jewish rabbi in public. She had every social barrier of the ancient world stacked against her, and she won the argument. What happens in this conversation, and why 2,000 years of theology have struggled to explain it, is one of the most important and least discussed questions in all of Scripture. The geography matters. This is not a random road. Tyre and Sidon, 2 ancient cities on the Mediterranean coast, modern-day Lebanon, approximately 20 miles north of Galilee, the boundary between Jewish and Gentile territory. When Joshua divided the land among the 12 tribes, Tyre and Sidon were allocated to the tribe of Asher. But Israel never conquered them. They remained outside Jewish control, inhabited by Gentile populations, for the entire biblical period. Jesus crossed that border deliberately. Mark chapter 7 says he entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. He was seeking rest, away from the pressure of increasing conflict with religious authorities in Galilee. He had just finished a heated confrontation with Pharisees over ritual purity laws. He crossed into Gentile territory to get away from it, and he was found. Now you need to understand exactly who this woman was in the eyes of Matthew's audience, because Matthew uses a word that would have hit first-century Jewish listeners like a stone. He calls her a Canaanite, not a Phoenician, not a Syrian, not simply a Gentile, a Canaanite. By the 1st century A.D., Canaanites had not existed as a living ethnic group for centuries. The word was a theological label, a historical category loaded with centuries of meaning. In Jewish scripture, Canaanites were the people God had commanded Israel to drive out or destroy when they entered the Promised Land. They were the symbol of idolatry, of paganism, of everything outside the covenant. When Matthew writes a Canaanite woman, he is not giving you a geographic description. He is telling his Jewish audience that the most historically impossible, theologically disqualified person imaginable is about to walk into the frame. Mark, writing for a Roman audience, simply calls her Syrophoenician, a Roman administrative term for the region. Same woman, 2 different authors, 2 different words, both chosen deliberately for their respective audiences. Her name is never given in either gospel. We have no name. We have only what she did. She cried out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is severely tormented by a demon." Jesus does not answer a word. Complete silence. Not a gentle redirection, not a compassionate pause. Silence. The disciples step in and tell him, "Send her away. She keeps crying out after us. She's causing a scene." Jesus then speaks, but he speaks to the disciples, not to the woman. He says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." He states his mission scope. He defines his assignment, and his assignment, as stated in Matthew 15:24, does not include her. The woman comes closer. She kneels in front of him. She reduces her entire request to 3 words, "Lord, help me." And Jesus speaks to her directly for the first time. He says, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." 3 refusals. Silence. Then a statement of mission exclusivity. Then a metaphor that places her outside the household. The Greek word Jesus uses is kunarion, a diminutive form, literally little dog, puppy. The standard harsh term for dogs in Jewish literature is kuon. Jesus does not use that word here. Scholars have split on what this means. Some say the diminutive softens the imagery entirely. Jesus is painting a domestic scene with household pets, not wild scavengers. Others, like scholar Joanna Dewey and New Testament professor Francis Taylor Gensch, argue that being called a small dog instead of a big dog doesn't significantly improve the experience. The category is still derogatory. Jesus has refused this woman 3 times. He has stated she is outside his mission. What is not in dispute, the woman picks up the exact word kunarion and turns it back on him. She does not reject the metaphor. She does not argue against the framework. She accepts the household scene he painted and finds the gap inside it. Yes, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. She takes his own metaphor. She flips it. She argues that even inside his framework, even accepting the distinction between children and household pets, her request is not a violation. Crumbs do not deprive children of bread. Healing her daughter costs his primary mission nothing. It is a logical counter-argument. Precise, contained, irrefutable within the terms he himself established. Then Jesus says, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that very hour. New Testament scholar Joanna Dewey wrote, in a statement that has been debated by biblical scholars for over 30 years, the narrative portrays Jesus being bested by a woman and changing his behavior on that account. This is the only instance in the extant tradition of Jesus being taught by someone, and that someone is a woman who should not properly have been speaking to him at all. The only instance in the entire gospel tradition where someone teaches Jesus something, and it is a Gentile woman who violated 3 simultaneous social barriers to do it: gender, ethnicity, and religious status, and who had been refused 3 consecutive times before she found the argument that worked. Traditional theology offers a ready answer. Jesus was testing her faith. The refusals were designed. The outcome was always planned. Kenneth Bailey, in his book Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, argues the entire exchange was carefully orchestrated to teach the disciples an unforgettable lesson about faith they would not have received any other way. These are not weak arguments. They are held by serious scholars across 20 centuries of theological tradition. But the textual problem does not disappear. If the outcome was always predetermined, why does Matthew include 3 separate stages of refusal? Mark's account, generally considered the earlier of the 2, includes the phrase, "Let the children be fed first." The word first implies a sequence. Gentiles come after Jews in sequence, not instead of Jews. Matthew removes that word entirely. If Matthew is sharpening the story for theological effect, he is sharpening the portrait of a Jesus who refuses more decisively and then complies after her argument. Now here is the context that almost no one includes. Before this encounter, Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sends the 12 disciples out with explicit instructions. Do not go to the Gentiles. Go only to the lost sheep of Israel. He states his mission scope in the same language he uses to this woman. After this encounter, Matthew chapter 15, Jesus returns from Gentile territory and feeds 4,000 people. Scholars note this differs from the feeding of 5,000 in Jewish territory. The number changes, the crowd changes, the territory changes, and at the end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, verse 19, Jesus gives his final instruction, "Go and make disciples of all nations." The trajectory of Matthew's entire Gospel moves from Jewish exclusivity toward universal inclusion. And sitting directly in the middle of that trajectory, a Canaanite woman who refused to accept 3 refusals, whether she changed his mind or confirmed what was always coming. She is the pivot point in the text. This story is not just about theology. It is about who was allowed to speak, to whom, about what. In first-century Palestinian culture, a woman did not approach and address a male rabbi publicly. A Gentile did not petition a Jewish teacher for religious favor. A Canaanite did not address the son of David using his own messianic title. She called him Lord, Son of David. She used Hebrew theological language she had no covenant right to use. She broke every rule of who gets to speak in this world. And she was right. And she won. The woman has no name in either gospel. But her name is not what survived. What survived is the argument. 7 words in Greek. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. 7 words that the most influential religious tradition in human history could not find a clean answer to, and still cannot agree on 2,000 years later. Jesus called her faith great, the greatest compliment the gospel record shows him giving to anyone's faith in the entire New Testament. Not to Peter, not to the 12, to a nameless Gentile woman who had been refused 3 times and kept coming. Whatever your theological position on what happened in that exchange, whether Jesus was testing her or learning from her, whether the outcome was predetermined or genuinely contingent on her persistence, the text puts her at the center of the most significant boundary crossing in the entire gospel narrative. The moment where the story of one people's Messiah begins its visible turn toward the whole world. She came with nothing, no name, no status, no covenant claim, no right to speak. She left with her daughter healed, and she left having said the one thing in the gospel record that Jesus could not argue against. That is not a small story. That has never been a small story. It has just been told too small for too long.